Hello everyone, Mike Stokes, Wild Alive University. Today I want to talk about self-acceptance and how to do it, and how to do it in a way that's not pretentious or ego-centered or, that turns you into a jerk, really. Because there's the self-entitlement and that underbelly of self-acceptance that is often misunderstood. First of all, I just want to put a shout out to JP and Ultra Spiritual. I really like the work that he's doing. His comedic take on the New Age spiritual personal development community. And I wish there was more of that kind of stuff out there, because the biggest problem with that community, of which I am, which I was a deep part of, and now I'm sort of on the edges of, is the dark underbelly, the side of which, the unconscious side of which you can get pretentious and ego-centered and not even know it. And, not have any boundaries in some realms and have way too many boundaries in others. So I think what I want to do these days is just promote people who I think are doing good work. So in that realm, in this genre, I think he's really worth watching. I haven't watched all his videos, but the one that I've watched, I really have enjoyed, and thought that there's beyond the comedy, there's a deeper meaning to what he's saying, which is for the most part, like I said, for the ones that I've watched, I'm aligned with. I also want to put a shout out to Teal Swan. My partner is super into her. She goes a little bit too much into the esoteric for my own flavor, but behind the esoteric symbology of what she's using to talk about her principles, they're very grounded. The way that she approaches personal development is very grounded, and from what I've seen, my partner watches way more than I do. I agree with the approach that she's taken, and the basic principles, at least, especially what I get from my partner secondhand, feels like she's creating a good foundation. So, 2 plugs there, for which I have absolutely no association with, by the way. I just think that they're doing valuable stuff in the community of New Age people. One of the things that I'd like to see in the New Age community is a deeper grounding. I want to see less sort of out there, airy-fairy talk, and more of a really deep grounding. Like, how do we take these principles and really use them in the world to make the world a better place, to to achieve our goals of peace, of harmony, of enlightenment among humans, and compassionate relations, and environmental invigoration and enhancement, and social justice. So, enough of that sort of segue. I hope that didn't take me too much off topic that you're no longer watching. But if you're still watching, how to achieve self-acceptance. So the first most important thing of achieving self-acceptance is really realizing what is the model, the ideal self that you're trying to live into. So, like it or not, every one of us has an ideal self that we're trying to live into. And for me, that ideal self was, so I grew up in the 80s. I was born in 68, and the 80s movies and TV and culture were what ruled the ideals that were culturally imposed upon me without my knowledge or my awareness. My parents weren't savvy enough to know that the culture was creating an identity in me which frankly just didn't align with who I was, and they didn't really have the skills to teach me how to deal with that. So in the 80s, I grew up in my social environment in the north coast of Los Angeles was super macho, muscle cars, sort of fighting localism around surf spots, and then sort of nouveau neo gang skate culture that was happening where I was growing up. And so I was trying to constantly be macho, constantly trying to be, I saw those guys getting all the girls, and I was constantly trying to be accepted by this group, which was failing at miserably. It's funny, my way of doing it was I would throw parties. So instead of actually becoming one of them, I was the guy that threw the parties that they all would have to accept if they wanted to come to the parties. So that gives you a hint into how I discovered how to accept myself later on. So the other part of my personal story was that I loved movies. I still love movies to this day, and I was watching all the heroic adventure movies and action movies in which it was pretty much a lone man against the world, and he had all the skills that he needed to conquer the world, whether it be, just Arnold Schwarzenegger and Predator fighting off the bad alien, or Terminator, or or even Star Wars to a certain degree. But more so just all of the other movies, which I can't even remember at this point, were all the sort of heroic action movies that I digested at the time. So I inherited this ideal of being the macho, independent man who didn't need anybody to help him succeed. And that I was supposed to be somehow quiet, and just silent, strong type. So for years, that was who I tried to be. And nobody ever actually told me to ask the question, who are you trying to be? Like, why are you trying to be this way? I'm not sure exactly when. I figured out over years and years of all of this self-discovery. I think it probably began with another shout out to Michael Mead and his work, where he sort of introduced me to the idea of how a gnarled, just completely worked piece of wood, driftwood, is flawed, but it's incredibly beautiful in its flaw. And so at that point, somewhere around that time, I began to start to look at who I was, independent of this cultural idea. And, frankly, being a young man in that era, in most eras, I just wanted a girl. I wanted the girl, and I wasn't getting the girl because I didn't fit into the category that I thought you had to fit into to get the girl. So the next thing that happened for me, and I'm talking... Now I'm into my 30s. I'm into my mid-30s by the time I'm starting to figure this stuff out. Unfortunately for me, it took me a long time of just pain and aloneness to figure it out. So in my mid-30s, I did two things. One was I kept trying to conquer this desire to be this solo, silent type. And I did 7 days alone in the wilderness. And then I did 14 days alone in the wilderness. And then finally I culminated it with 30 days alone in the wilderness. And along with that time, I started to read a few mythological stories, and I read this one story called The Companions. And in the story of The Companions, there's a prince who's sick, and the king says, looks for all the cures and can't find the cure. And then the prince says, I want to go and search for, the most beautiful princess in the world who lives in the witch's castle on the other end of the kingdom. And the king's like, no. And the prince is about to die. And so finally he says, okay, go ahead. Go look for the most beautiful woman in the world. And instantly he starts to get better. So the story goes on, and he's going down the road, and he meets this guy who's super fat. And he's like, well, do you want to come with me on my adventure? I'm going to find the most beautiful woman in the world and marry her and bring her home. And the guy says, sure, I'd like to come. And then the prince says, well, what do you have to offer? He's like, I can eat anything. So here's this guy who has this seemingly no value at all, or that he's fat and he's got a voracious appetite. Then he goes, so they go along, and then there's another guy who's super skinny and always cold and scared. And then the guy's like, well, what can you do? And he's, I'm never hot. So, and then there's another guy who's got bandages on his eyes, and he's like, I can't, if I take my eyes off, I just burn anything I see. And so he takes him, and there's a couple other characters, and then they get to where the witches, and I'm not going to go through the whole story, but basically there's a whole bunch of trials, and the fat guy said he's told to go eat, all the cows, and the witch says to him, you got to eat, if you want my daughter, you got to eat all the cows and drink all the wine barrel caskets in the bottom of the castle. There's like 100 cows and 500 wine barrel caskets, and so he says, well, can I just have my friend do it? And the witch is like, yeah, fine, nobody can do it. So he has his friends do it, and his friend eats all the cows and drinks all the wine, and then is complaining like, oh, I'm so hungry. I'm still so hungry. There's not enough food. So then, same thing happens with the cold guy. He says, oh, you got to sit in this fire. He says, well, can I let my friend sit in this fire? And so he puts the friend who's always cold in the fire. The fire burns into this huge inferno. They come back in the morning, and he's still sitting there shivering in the middle of the fire. And then there's another guy who can see really far, but he's really nervous. He can't see anything up close, and he figures out where the ring is. And then they all they go into the room, and he's won over the princess. And then they start to fall asleep because the moon comes and the dream of love starts to kind of take him away. And then they're able to get out of the dream and come back and find the queen and then run back to the house. And so there's other elements to the story. But the point that is critical for self-acceptance in my particular case, and it may be in yours, is that I was trying to live into this ideal of where I had to do everything myself. And I realized at that point in my life, over that and a number of other things, that it was more important to figure out who you already are. And in my case, I was an incredibly social person. I love talking to people. I'm making these videos. I'm kind of out there on my sleeve, and that's where I have the most vitality and energy. And in combination with my 30-day solo, I realized that I no longer had to try to conquer this quote-unquote weakness of mine, that I needed to embrace who I was, and who I am is someone who's incredibly social. Now, we're all social to a certain degree, to one degree or another. Now, I have a higher level than most people of the need for social. So, and that happens however it happens when you're growing up. So the point of self-acceptance is to figure out what is the ideal, or who are you trying to become? And why are you trying to become that? You know, for me, it was really the wealth and the women. I wanted wealth and women. Now, I'm also a compassionate, nice guy who believes in fairness and taking care of nature, so I didn't want to do that in a way that was harmful. But I still saw this strong silent type as really the individual strong silent type who didn't need any support. I still saw that as an ideal that I needed. And, you know, to this day, I still am very drawn to people who are that way. But now I appreciate that it's not my innate character. It's just a little piece over here. It's a little piece over here that comes up. And I have those moments of it, but I'm no longer trying to put myself into that identity anymore. I'm just accepting it as it evolves. Like and it ebbs and flows. Some days I'm more strong silent type. Some days I'm way more social. But I'm predominantly way more social. So at that point in my life, that's when my life started to open up. That's when I started to find self-acceptance. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't learn how to balance your checkbook if you can't afford to hire an accountant who knows how to do all that stuff for you, or who can do all that stuff for you. But it is to say that you shouldn't be really focusing on all your weaknesses and trying to fix them. That's a very mediocre life. All the greats throughout history really delved into who they were and what they were great at, and exploited that to the maximum degree inside of their values. So for me, I value nature, I value fairness, I value kindness, I value compassion, I value empathy, and I value health, and I value strength. So all those things I'm trying to put in to this strength that I have of being very social and being very vocal. So the point is that you have to ask that question: who am I trying to be? And more importantly, well, equally importantly, why am I trying to be that person? Because there's something you want. You know, I wanted the women, and I wanted the wealth, and I wanted the health. I wanted those three things: women, wealth, and health. I wanted those things. I wanted to feel good, and I wanted those trappings. And so, you know, I don't have $1 billion and a harem of women, nor would I really want that, I don't think. I mean, I'd want the $1 billion just because I could do more good and do more interesting things in the world. But I have a beautiful partner. I have now a beautiful child. None of those things would have happened had I not learned to accept myself. An interesting thing that happens when you start crossing the bridge from trying to become something that you're not to figuring out who you are and becoming more of it, you start to become more attractive, not only to yourself and not only to others of the sex that you're not attracted to, but also to others of the sex that you are attracted to. Hetero, homosexual, trans, whatever, doesn't matter. Self-acceptance is probably, self-acceptance and personal power are the two most attractive things out there. And it took me a long time to figure that out. So I'm trying to share it so that, I wish I'd watched this video. That's why I make these videos, because I'm hoping that there's somebody out there who's gone through a similar cadence of events as I have and is getting value out of it and how to learn it. So to simplify it, again, ask that question: who are you trying to be? And then you got to begin the process of what do I value and what are my strengths? And what really lights me up? So being alone, doing stuff in front of a computer doesn't light me up. This is about as close to alone as I get. I'm alone in my sauna, and I'm making a video that I'm putting out into the world. So I'm alone, but I'm not. I'm projecting what I'm doing into the world so it feels inspiring and enlightening to me. If I were to be trying to make this video for myself, it'd be dead. It'd be flat. It wouldn't work for me. It's not who my fundamental character is. Another thing I think is very important is that, we inherit these ideas of what it's okay to want. Total fucking horseshit when it comes to personal development. As long as they're aligned with your values, like your core values. I stated mine earlier, like nature, fairness, compassion, nature, fairness, compassion. Those are the biggies. I also value strength and health. But those 5 things, it doesn't matter what I want as long as they're consistent with those 5 things. Some people tell you, oh, you shouldn't want to have 3 wives. It doesn't matter. As long as you can be compassionate, have integrity, and those 3 wives are stoked on you being their one husband, great. Now, personally, that sounds like a nightmare to me. It sounds like a lot of, relationship management and people's feelings getting hurt, and I don't know. Maybe people can do it, but I haven't seen many examples of that. So the point is it doesn't matter what the outside world says you should want. It matters what you say inside you should want. My only caveat for that is that if you think that you're going to harm others or you're not actually making the world a better place, then you need to question that. But for the most part, I doubt anybody who's watching this video is going to be in that camp. Although it is healthy for us to just question every now and then, to just take a step back and see, well, who am I harming? One of the biggest fallacies in spiritual development and personal growth, especially on the sort of compassionate side, is this idea that we can live a life and do no harm. It's impossible. Life exists in a balance of an ecological relationship. In every ecological relationship, when you take a resource, you by nature take it away from something else. Even if you're 100% vegetarian, unless you're 100% vegetarian and living off your land with no inputs, 100% closed cycle, even then you're taking carbon out of the atmosphere, you're taking oxygen out of the atmosphere, you're taking nitrogen out of the atmosphere. Even then you're affecting the outer system and you're related to it somehow. There's tools that you're buying that are connected to the outside system. And every one of those tools, if you look anything into life cycle analysis, has, anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 impacts that are just completely unconscious to us. So the point isn't to try to figure out what those 10,000 consequences are. The point is to try to figure out how you can maximize your benefit to the world and minimize your harm. And I think what I'm saying is for people who care about the world. If you don't care about the world, then don't bother watching my stuff, because it's not for you. I actually don't want the people who don't care about the world to succeed. I want them to fail and to move and to either have a transformation and come to caring about the world, or to phase themselves out of the world, because the world doesn't need anybody else who doesn't care about the welfare of the world and other people and all of life. We need more people who do. And then if you're in that camp, I apologize for being so blunt, but you need to change. If you're already in that camp, yes, let's keep going. I think that's pretty much it. It's really pretty simple. Not easy, but simple. Figure out who you're trying to be. If you're not experiencing self-acceptance and developing your own strengths, and then surrounding yourself with people that that are filling in the gaps that you have. You know, I'm not a paperwork person. I'm not an accountant. So I fill in the gaps with people around me that have those kind of skills. If you're not exercising your strengths and your values and making them better, and then moving your weaknesses sort of out to the side, sure, you got to learn how to balance your checkbook if that's, you know, if that's causing you pain. You got to do those little things. But for the most part, most of your energy should be focused on accentuating your strengths. And then the other part of that, asking who you're trying to become, sort of discovering those cultural and family influences that are pushing you into this idea. At first, it's going to be kind of hard. You're not going to be able to see it if you haven't already done this work. It's going to be kind of blind to you. You're just going to think like, oh, this is who I need to be. But the truth is that 90% of the time, no, 100% of the time, what you inherited as an ideal was a completely random construct that came from your family's unconscious and your cultural unconscious, and then historical and educational things that you may have been exposed to. So for most of us, we didn't have parents that were able to sort of craft that in the best way and give us the best influences. They just sort of landed there, and now we're sort of swimming out of it. So discover what all those influences are, and then start to peel them away. You know, for example, one of the ones I had to peel away was my mother was constantly sort of in pain and blaming my father for when they split up. And for a long time, I just adopted that narrative. And then I realized, oh crap, that's my mom's narrative, and it's not my narrative. And I would find up until that point that those were the kind of relationships that I would get into. And then the woman would leave, and then I'd be like, well, why did they leave? And why did they do this to me? And they shouldn't have left, and I'm a good person. But that was just the narrative that I was stuck in, you know. And then for a while, I jumped into my father's narrative, which is, you know, your mom's crazy, I can't deal with her. And so then that was like, oh, well, she's crazy, and I you know, whatever, I just got to deal with the crazy, and then, or get out. And so I peeled apart those two narratives, and now I can be in a healthy, happy relationship because I can create my own narrative. Now, that's just family and relationships. We have these all over the world. We have these in cultural stuff. We have these in the way we relate to career, the way we relate to neighbors, the way we relate to friends, all of that stuff. So you got to take all of those narratives that are already there, dissect them, get rid of the ones you don't want, and then add your values to them. You know, compassion, integrity, value for nature, empathy, whatever yours are. And that's the process. I highly recommend writing it down. You know, it may take you writing it down 10 times, but eventually you'll get to a place where you develop enough awareness and you'll realize. One thing besides writing it down is expose yourself to new information. I had to peel myself out of a mental paradigm of lack. So I used to think in very much of lack terms around relationships. I would think that there was, you know, the one or something like that, and that there was, you know, just there was a needle in a haystack, and I was never going to find her. And then, so for about 2 years prior to my relationship, I kept transforming that narrative and exposing myself to, you know, how many women there were on the planet, how many available women there were on the planet, all these different types of women that might be interested in somebody like me who's more social and more outgoing and kind of, you know, a little rough around the edges, not like sort of refined and straight. And that's, you know, maybe 1 billion. I don't know. It's a lot, though. And so I had to peel those narrative beliefs out. And those narrative beliefs came from the social structure, the family structure, and then the information structure that I had put myself into. So a great way to start peeling those out is to start digesting information, whether it be from YouTube videos, whether it be from books, whether it be from alternative news sites. I'm not talking about alternative news in the conservative sense, but ones that are more aligned with something that makes sense for you in terms of what you want. It needs to make sense for you. One of the problems that people face in the spiritual world is they think like, oh, I can just fake it till I make it when it comes to my beliefs. Beliefs don't work that way. You've got to latch on to little beliefs that start chinking away the big belief. Now, the only way that doesn't happen, of chinking away those little beliefs until you get to the big one, is if you're in like a closed transformational environment that's a year long or minimum 6 months long, and inside of that closed environment, like in a community that's really sort of uncovering all this stuff, then you can rapidly peel out deep complexes that are stuck in your psyche. But if you're not going to do that, you need to just sort of accept the process of peeling away layers of stuff that was just laid, just built on top of you when you were this little kid, and now you got to peel away each one until you get down to who you really want to be and who you are. One more idea about this getting to who you are. The who you are thing, again, is one of those paradox wisdoms. You are never solid. You know, we are, you know, for lack of a better term, quantum particles. Our fundamental nature is changing. But the apparent and physical level reality that we have to deal with is the hardwiring of our brain, the hardwire of our emotional body, and how that interplays with our ability to change the plasticity of the brain and to change the fundamental nature of how we're wired into the matrix. So, at the same time I'm saying, discover who you are and become more of that. Also know that that's fluid. That can change. And you can change that. The problem is when you try to change it into something that was culturally or familiarly sort of imposed on top of you. That doesn't work. You have to sort of organically find it from the inside and then see what you're becoming, and then let that become more of who you are. I hope this video has been valuable to you. I apologize about the boring nature of these videos, just me in the sauna, but like I said before, it's where I do my best thinking. And maybe when I have more money and more subscribers, I'll figure out a way to edit them so there's beautiful pictures and stuff like that. But for now, this is what I got, and I also believe that that's a great way to move forward. Just take what you got and push it forward. So please subscribe if you like the content and want more, and go to the website to sign up on our email list and see more of the stuff that I have. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.